For crying out loud. Recording 4 episodes in a row, and I haven't even gotten to the world's smallest political quiz. I'm not even going to do that right now. I might bring that up for the new podcast I'm getting ready to do here in the next month or two. Remember the Chore of Duty? Hi guys, I'm Spike.
Jordy!
That's Chris, and just so you know, this is Geeking Out. This is not the Chore of Duty, but just a little shop talk here before we start. I am going to bring back the Chore of Duty, but it's not going to be. It is going to be as a podcast. Okay, so you'll still be able to access it here on the Who What Where channel on YouTube, but it's just going to, you will not be seeing my ugly mug while I'm doing it. They'll just have a graphic on the screen.
Which actually is good for him, and actually a really great idea, because that way you don't have to actually, edit and all that stuff. You can just say as long as you want, as much as you want.
Right, in auditory form, and this way you'll be able to download it and take it with you. Yeah. If you are that incessantly bored that you have to listen to us chatter about a bunch of crap for a half hour at a time. I mean, you think these 30 and 40-minute episodes on YouTube are a slog. Wait till we start doing audio-only podcasts that are like 2 hours long. Jeez.
Do not but talk.
So anyway, because it's a lot easier for me to edit audio than it is video. We'll still be doing YouTube videos, like I said, but just stay tuned for that. I got to figure out which podcast service I'm going to go with and a bunch of other stuff. But anyway, this is an unscheduled. Where of course we record a bunch of these episodes at once, usually once a week, usually on Saturdays.
As you can tell with the same shirts.
Right now, our buddy Scott is off in Louisville enjoying himself. So we're not broadcasting this live. So Scott will be back in the shop by the time this hits the air. So all you thieves, go pound sand, okay? Wanted to discuss real quick. We mentioned in the last episode you were wondering about the range of PBS because you thought it was just like a Kentucky thing.
Well, yeah, because I remember always coming home from school and you had Sesame Street on there, and Mom always watched Perot and Sherlock Holmes and the mystery stuff that they had a lot on there, and that's Jerry Lewis telephones and things like that, and it was always like, it always mentioned Kentucky and things like that, but I didn't know from hearing, like, I don't know, some huge Hollywood actor on doing an interview and saying, yeah, I used to watch certain things on PBS, and I'm like, well, dear Lord, I thought, like, does it go to California or Canada, or what's the range on PBS?
Let me explain about PBS, and then we're going to explain about KET, and this won't take long. I hope it doesn't take long, but we're going to explain why KET is one of the 3 cornerstones of PBS as it is today. KET is actually one of the most important public broadcasters in the United States, and I'll explain why. Okay, PBS has its roots back to 1970, but educational television goes back before that. Okay, there was a network before PBS. Okay, now you've heard the political things about why people don't want to fund PBS with tax money because they're so freaking liberal, right? Have you heard of that?
No, not until now.
Well, PBS has a reputation for being extremely liberal. Okay, so politically, and they are. Politically, they're extremely liberal. When you look at their commentary shows, their news shows, their so-called news hour, and all that other stuff.
See, I never really paid much attention to it. Like, I mean, Ghost Rider, Wishbone, and shoot,
some of the other kids' shows.
Yeah, those are the only ones I've watched.
Anyway, but PBS actually dates back to 1970. Before that, before PBS became liberal, there was another one called National Educational Television. This was founded back in the mid to late 50s, believe it or not, by the Ford Foundation, Henry Ford's philanthropic arm.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, the Ford Motor Company is indirectly responsible for educational television being established in this country because they paid the bills. Okay, they were the ones who provided the initial funding for National Educational Television, or NET. if you want to find out more details about any of these things, check them out on Wikipedia. They've got full pages. You'll be amazed at some of the logos. And there's actually, you can actually see an artifact of NET if you, in two places. Remember Mr. Rogers? When Mr. Rogers first comes on the air, when the program first starts, you're going to see a little house. Okay, it always starts on a house on a hill, and you come down the street from it. The house has a weird shaped roof. Okay, one side of the roof is angled a little more sharply than the other side. Now, this is mainly on the older ones. Some of the newer episodes, I don't think they use this as much. The old NET logo was a house with a little antenna up here, and it had a sharp slope here and a lazy slope here, and it had the letters NET under it to show education in the home. And they used to have the NET logo because before PBS was started, Mr. Rogers was an NET show. So was Sesame Street. Sesame Street is older than PBS. Sesame Street turned 50 this year. PBS is only 49. PBS is 1 year older than I am. Sesame Street is 2 years older than I am. So, yeah, I was born in 71, so I don't care. Anyway. So for the reputation PBS has, and PBS does not, everybody's just come to accept, yeah, they tend to take a leftist view of things. Okay, they tend to take that hyper-educated point of view on things because, you know, educational television. NET was accused of communism. They were accused of being a working branch of the Communist Party of the United States of America. That's how far left they were. And they were. One of the last episodes, one of the last series they produced after, I mean, NET they generated a lot of shows besides just Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers, but those are the two longest running ones. They also started a lot of the TV shows. The NewsHour started out on NET, not on PBS. Before McNeil-Lehrer in the 80s, that actually traced its roots back to NET News Journal before McNeil and Lehrer took over. They had a show on called Soul! Exclamation point, which you can find on Pluto or on the Shout Factory TV app. You can watch episodes of it for free. This dates from like 1968-69. They started this in response to the assassination of Martin Luther King. The idea is to reflect black culture in its purest form without any kind of filters or anything. So you've got everybody from James Brown to Isaac Hayes to Jesse Jackson, all kinds of black poets and stuff. It started on NET and it continued for a few years on PBS. You can watch those episodes. I strongly recommend you do because it will blow your mind watching some of these classic episodes. Anyway, so like I said, NET was accused of borderline communism. They were considered to be un-American. And so the Ford Foundation was threatening to pull its funding for it. And the Ford Foundation was looking, is there a way to reorganize this so we can salvage educational television in America and maybe take a lot of the politics out of it? So the idea they came up with, they were talking with some of the smaller educational channels and stuff in the country. There was one in New York, which was WNET. You can imagine what the NET stands for, National Educational Television. That's the old network's flagship. Okay, just like CBS has WCBS in New York, NBC has WNBC in New York. The National Educational Television had WNET. They still produce Nature, Masterpiece Theater, what was the other one? And several others. They produce a lot of the harder hitting and news stuff. The other one came out of Boston, and that's WGBH. GBH stands for Greater Boston Harbor, I believe. WGBH, they're the ones who produce a lot of the other PBS shows you know. They're the ones who produce a lot of things with the BBC. They do a lot of documentary films. They do mystery. They do a whole bunch of kids shows like Arthur and stuff. That's WGBH. The third leg of that tripod that NET was resting on was KET, Kentucky Educational Television. That was a network that was built across the state of Kentucky, mainly because there were not that many TV stations in Kentucky. You had a few in Louisville, you had a few in Lexington, you had one in Paducah, you had a couple in, actually you only had one in northern Kentucky. That was WXIX out of Newport, because all the other channels went across the river to Cincinnati. So there were not that many.
That's right, because we also had Hee Haw.
Yeah.
Because the two people from Hee Haw, what are their names? They were from Kentucky.
Yeah, Buck Owens and Roy Clark. They were from
Yeah.
Kentucky. Anyway. But yeah, that started out on CBS and wound up going into syndication. That's neither here nor there. But anyway, the Ford Foundation pulls their funding from NET and reorganizes, and they get a working group together with, they take people, executives from WNET, from WGBH, and KET, namely old Leonard Press, who is the founder. You may have heard of him not too long ago. He passed away not that long ago.
Yeah.
Those guys all got together and decided, how can we rework this so that we don't have Congress mad at us every single year threatening to shut us down? They had to jettison a lot of the NET talent. A lot of the producers and stuff had to go. And they reorganized as Public Broadcasting Service, or PBS. So from like 1970 on, where NET stopped, PBS took over. All the old NET shows suddenly became PBS shows. And PBS picked up and has been carrying with it ever since. Now, again, they've had their funding. They grew their funding would shrink. Their funding would grow, their funding would shrink. Mr. Rogers would go and cuss out the Congress for cutting their funding, and all of a sudden they'd have plenty of money, and then a couple of years later they forget about Mr. Rogers and it all shrinks back down. Finally, under Reagan and such, they finally stabilized the funding because they stabilized it small, but all these corporations realized they could get, if they subsidized PBS and educational television, that's a tax write-off. So that took care of that. So every one of these now has about a minute of little mini, they're not commercials, but whatever PBS calls them this week, supporter messages, I guess, and viewers like you is how they always end it. That's when you know you're watching the ads. But anyway, at least they don't interrupt the shows in the middle usually. But where KET comes into it, KET, like I said, WNET is huge. They do roughly half of PBS's I'll take it back. They do about a third of PBS's programming, okay? WGBH does almost 2/3 the rest of the programming, okay? There are a few little things that are done by like Oregon Public Television, DC, their WETA will do it. That's Educational Television Authority in Washington, D.C., and all these other little things will have a show crop up here and there. KET became the backbone of the educational side of educational television. KET would do a lot of the heavy lifting as far as earning that accreditation as educational. So they would do things on math, they were doing things on science, they were doing things on social studies, they were doing, all the school subjects were there. Elementary level, high school level, college level especially. There's one you may have heard of and you may not have known. This is a Kentucky thing. This is created by KET. It's called the GED, the General Equivalency Diploma. So for people who dropped out of high school or for some reason couldn't complete high school, they can essentially study up for a really intense test. And basically, if they can pass that test, they get the equivalent of a high school diploma in the GED. That's a KET idea. KET developed that because so many people in Kentucky were dropping out of school, and they did that to try to elevate the state back up. And as PBS was looking at the results of it, they wanted in on it, so KET developed the GED, and PBS distributed it nationally. Now it's actually taken on a life of its own. KET still is heavily involved in it, as far as last I heard, but GED is now basically part of the educational system of the United States. That all came about because of NET and their focus. Now the important thing about KET, and we're already long-winded. Didn't mean for this to go 10 minutes. We're hitting 15. The important thing about KET, like I was saying earlier, there were not a whole lot of television stations in Kentucky at the time. We're talking about like in the 60s, 70s, 50s, 60s, 70s. The idea started rolling with the state legislature and Old Leonard Press back in the late 50s. They were coming out with NET. As NET got started, Old Leonard Press went to the Kentucky legislature and said, we can do that here. That's why when you see an ident like that says KET on the KET channel, you'll see a list of about 15 or 20 TV stations. Okay, there's like WKPA in Paducah, there's WKLE in Lexington, there's WKMR in Moorhead, and so on and so forth.
That's why I always thought that it was just in Kentucky bound, because you would have all these things that was just mentioning Kentucky.
Right. KET was set up so that people in Kentucky would have something to watch. They had a television. Okay, if they you could not reliably get network television. In fact, there are large parts of Kentucky you still can't get network television without a satellite dish or a streaming service or something like that. So it's not as important as it used to be. But the reason why the government, Kentucky state government, pushed for it so hard, they realized they had people all over the place. I mean, Kentucky is not a small state. Okay, it's not the biggest state, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not small. It covers an insane amount of area. So KET would wind up setting up shop so that every square inch of the state would be covered by KET signal. As a result, it wound up spilling into West Virginia and Ohio and Indiana and Illinois, Missouri, down into Tennessee and into Virginia. Okay, so all kinds of people were getting benefits from the KET signal. And all of that depended on, at first, the state of Kentucky paying the bill, but as more and more people in Kentucky started warming up to the idea of KET, they started paying more and more of the bill themselves. This KET still gets state funding. Okay, it's not nearly as much as it used to be, but they still get some state funding for vital educational purposes. A lot of the educational resources that public and private schools get in the Commonwealth of Kentucky today comes from KET. Right. And in fact, a lot of systems around the country use KET systems in order to do like multimedia education for their kids. So that's what KET does. That's the history of PBS, NET, and KET. It all started back in the 50s, and they said, there's got to be something better than a clown hitting somebody in the face with a pie.
I forgot about Bozo.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
And Bozo actually responded to that criticism by trying to do more public friendly things.
Oh my goodness, I can't believe I forgot about Bozo.
But NET started as a direct response to Bozo and his but mainly his imitators. Not so much to Bozo, but to his imitators, because they didn't have the class Bozo had.
Because I went from Bozo, I remember going from Bozo, and then all of a sudden they had a clown on The Simpsons that looked just like Bozo, and I was just like,
Krusty the Clown. Krusty the Clown is the distillation of all those 50s and 60s.
I cannot believe I forgot about Bozo.
Kids shows,
I used to watch them all the time.
And so essentially you could say educational television was a direct response to Krusty the Clown, before Krusty the Clown even hit the air. So, yeah. So that's just my long-winded, believe it or not, that is a brief explanation of what happened. Like I said, check out the Wikipedia pages for NET, PBS, and KET, and you will be amazed at the amount of history you did not know.
I did not know a lot of this.
It's great reading on a cold, blustery, wet afternoon.
Like today.
Like today. So, hey, check it out, find out what you can, and if you can spare like $5 a month, like you do for all your other streaming services, support KET for $5 a month. You get access to the PBS app where you can see all the old KET stuff, the old PBS stuff, and the new stuff too. It's all right there on demand. And that is one of my new recommended streaming services is PBS with the KET passport.
I totally agree with that. I remember watching Reading Rainbow, and we took a school field trip to the news station, one of the news stations in Lexington, And who was walking down the sidewalk was LeVar Burton.
That's
and
good.
I'm just like, reading Rainbow, Star Trek.
Yep.
You're here in Kentucky. I was just like, what?
You remember Robert Townsend?
Yes.
He got his start on KET. There was a show called Another Page that was dedicated to adult literacy. That's him. He did that. He wasn't the one who developed it, but he was one of the stars of the show.
This is bringing back like a lot of memories.
That's the whole point of the show, right?
Wow.
So anyway, hit us up in the comments if you remember Another Page, or if you have a particular KET thing. If there are particular shows you'd like us to discuss. I remember Math Country, for God's sake. I remember Mulligan Stew. I had a coloring book of one of their coloring books for years. That was the Department of Agriculture's first television show, as a matter of fact, I believe.
Where in the world is Carmen Sandiego?
There's one from the 90s.
Game show.
Yeah,
The game show.
which was epic in its own right. But
Yeah.
you want to talk about multimedia.
Wow.
That was, Roterbund knew what they were doing. So anyway, until next time, guys, I'm Spike.
I'm Chris.
And remember, reading is fundamental. We'll see you next time on
Reading
Geeking Out.
Rainbow.